This is the first new feature of C# 9. This is actually a good news for the newbies who wants to learn C# now, because they can use the advantage of top-level statements. So what does it mean exactly? In a C# file, you can write the statements above the class or namespace. See, typically, you have to create namespace, and under that particular namespace, you have to write a class called program, and inside of it, you have to write static void main, and inside the main method only, the actual statements can be written. So, even for the beginners or experienced developers, the same rule is applicable, that is earlier. But now, with the help of these top-level statements, you can bypass all of that namespace, class, and static void main. You can write the statements directly in a file at the top level. So they are called top-level statements. Of course, eventually those statements are compiled by the C# compiler and will be converted into a class called program class, into a static void main. For example, you have written 10 statements inside of your file. Those are eventually converted as static void main automatically by the compiler itself. So, like I said, for experienced C# developers, this is not much benefit because they know the namespaces, classes, methods, etc. But for the newbies who begin to learn C#, it's a great choice because they can focus on the actual statements such as system.console.writeline or variables or any other basic stuff instead of confusing about static void main, class program, etc. at the beginning days itself. But before practicing this feature, make sure you have installed Visual Studio 2022 because by default in Visual Studio 2022, the .NET 6 is enabled. So if you want to use .NET 5 or .NET 6, the Visual Studio 2022 is better. So you can go to this site visualstudio.microsoft.com and then scroll down. Here under this Visual Studio, you have Download Visual Studio. There you can click on Community 2022. And the installation steps will be same as how do you install Visual Studio 2019 or earlier. So after installing the same, you can open up the same Visual Studio 2022 and then here under all languages try selecting C# and under this third drop-down list select console. So it will shortlist and shows up only two options, that is console app and console app.NET framework. So for all the lectures of the previous sections, we were using this one, that is console app.NET framework. But from this lecture onwards, for all the further sections, we are going to use this one, console app. So what makes the difference is that if you want to use .NET framework, you have to use this console app.NET framework. But in case if you want to use .NET Core or .NET, you have to use console app. They did not mention .NET Core or .NET in brackets. It means by default the same. So now I would like to use .NET 6 in this case. So I am selecting console app. So select C# and console. And then after that, provide the project name as usual. For example, top level statement. And location will be C:, C# as usual. You can try selecting any other folder, whatever you like. and click on Next. And here you can try choosing .NET 6.0, that is long-term support. In case for some reason if you want .NET Core or .NET 5, you can choose the same. That is here. In this drop-down list you can choose the one that you want. But for time being I am selecting .NET 6 and then click on Create. You can follow the same steps for all the further lectures in the same section and also for further sections. Now you are surprised that you are not seeing that static void main typical syntax. Because by default in .NET 5 or .NET 6, C# 9 and 10 respectively enabled, and in the C# 9 itself, top level statements have been introduced, which means that this is an example of top level statements. You can simply writing the actual code that you want to write without worrying about static void main. So for the new base, it's a great thing, right? They will not ask questions related to static void main or any other confusing topics. Simply they can write the code that is console.writeLine and variables or whatever they want. They can simply write any code, any statements. They can use the predefined classes as well as user-defined classes here. For example, they can declare variables. They can write any code, something like this. It will print the string that is hello to my name. So when you run this application by clicking on this run button, it automatically opens up this command prompt window with relevant output. But what is this strange message? It is saying that to automatically close this console window, go to Tools, Options, Debugging and enable this option called Automatically Close. Well, earlier in almost all the programs, we were writing the last statement as system.console.read key. It is required in order to make the console window wait for pressing some key on the keyboard. But it is no longer required with this option. It is by default enabled here. That means every time when you run this application now, it automatically makes the window wait for pressing some key on the keyboard. In case if you want to disable that feature, if you want to go back to the older approach, where you have to use the console.read key statement, then you can enable the same by using this Tools, Options, Debugging category. Means, for example, you don't want this console window wait for your input. It should be closed automatically. In that case, you can go to the Tools menu in Visual Studio, go to Options, and there under this Debugging, under General, and here scroll down the window and almost at the bottom you have an option called Automatically Close the console when the debugging stops. So click on that. Once you check this particular checkbox and say OK, now when you run this application next time, now that window appears and closes immediately there. Then in order to make it wait, we have to try using console.read key statement as usual. Now that window appears normally. So it is up to you whether it has to wait for pressing some key on the keyboard automatically, or you would like to use the console.read key yourself. It is up to you. So my personal preference is I would like to try using console.read key statement in every program myself. So I am checking that checkbox. Okay, alright. So what kind of statements you can write in these top level statements? You can write almost any code. At the top, you can add the using directives if you want. For example, you would like to import system namespace and also system.io or any other namespaces that you want. So at the top, using directives and then your top level statements. You can write like this. But I have a question here. Can we mix the same with classes or namespaces? For example, I am adding a namespace here. Some namespace, for example, namespace 1. And for example, I would like to create a class. So is it possible to do like this? Yes, it is possible. It is working fine. No errors. But I have a question here. Can we write this namespace definition just above the top level statements that is here? No, it is not. We are getting errors. And see that error message. It is saying that CS8803 top level statements must precede the namespace and type declarations. So that error message means you cannot write the namespaces or classes above these top level statements. In other words, the top level statements must be present only at the top of the file, but not after the namespaces or classes. So you must place this code just above the namespaces. Okay, we understood a point. But I have another question here. Can we write the top level statements in multiple files in the same project? For example, in the same project, I am trying to add a new file. Right-click on the project in the Solution Explorer, click on New Item, and then select Code Class. Name of the file, for example, another.cs. Forget about the name can be anything. So delete the default code. Now we are inside this another.cs file. Now in this another.cs file, I am going to create some other top level statement just for testing purpose. So I will see this particular message if that another.cs file runs. Now run this. Oops, we are getting error. What it says is that only one compilation unit, that means only one file, can have top level statements. So what this error message says that in the entire C# project, in only one single file, you can use the top level statements. You cannot use the top level statements in multiple files in the same project. So that is being said, you cannot write like this. You will get error. Yes, this is the error message that you will get when you try using top level statements in more than one file. But in case if you have another project, maybe another console application in the same solution, there you can write top level statements in another file. That's different. So this is the rule for one single project. Okay, alright. And I have another question here. For example, in the class sample, we have a method, for example, method 1, And here I would like to get the value from that above mentioned variable. See above in the top level statements, we have created a variable called name. I would like to get means access that variable here. Is it possible? No, it is not. It says error. So what is this error message saying? That is, cannot use local variable or local function name that is declared in the top level statement. So that is being said, the variables or local functions that are created inside of your top level statements are not accessible to other classes or other namespaces. It is because these particular top level statements that you write here will be eventually converted as static void main by the compiler itself. So what the compiler will do is that it will take these top level statements that you write in this file and would generate a class called program class automatically with static void main. And in that static void main, it will place all these top level statements. The same statements what you write. In that way, this piece of the code becomes valid. So assume in this static void main, there is a variable called name. And by default, it is the local variable to the main method, right? And that is the reason that name variable is not accessible to outside the code, means to other classes or namespaces which are outside the static void main. But in C# community, there is a proposal such that it should be possible to access the local variables of the top level statements to be accessible outside the top level statements, that is inside the classes or namespaces of the same file or different file in the entire project. But as of now, it is not accessible like that. But maybe in the future updates of C#, it might be possible to access these local variables outside the top level statements. As of now, it is not. Okay, let's summarize and brief what we have learned so far. The top level statements are the statements that you write before the namespaces or classes in a file. For example, these are the top level statements whatever you write in this file. The C# compiler automatically converts all of the top level statements into an automatically generated program class with static main method. So in that automatically generated main method, the top level statements are kept. And that is the reason C# compiler doesn't allow you to write your own static void main in your program in case if you are using top level statements. For example here, maybe in the same file or another file, I am writing class program with static void main and it is not allowed. It says that missing partial modifier. So it is not possible to write your own program class with static void main. Let me change the class name, for example, program2. Now it is allowed, but when you try running that, now it would not execute that static void main. It is running only the top level statements that you write there. So in that way, if you want to use the static void main, you need not try using the top level statements. So generally either of these you can use. So what is the main advantage of these top level statements? For the new beginners who wants to learn C# nowadays, it is best thing, right? because they can learn the C# basics such as data types, console statements, etc. without worrying about static void main, all that stuff. But eventually they can learn about classes, namespaces, etc. Then they can understand what is static void main and how does it work. But on the opposite side, for experienced C# developers like us, it has no specific benefit. It is very rare to use in real-world applications. And one of the rules is that only one C# file can have the top-level statements, and we have already seen that before a moment. The local variables or local functions of the top-level statements cannot be accessible outside the top-level statements. For example, name is the local variable of the top-level statement. It can be accessible in the top-level statements itself, that is here. But outside of the top-level statements, you cannot access that local variables, that is here. And next point is, the compiler-generated program class and main method is completely reserved for the compiler itself. So as a developer, from nowhere you can access that compiler-generated program class or main method. For example, if you are thinking to call this main method from this program class from your own code, it is not possible. It is reserved by the compiler itself. And the top-level statements by default contain a default parameter called string array args. Using that, you can access the command line arguments. Okay, we have not covered the command line arguments yet. If possible, I will make a lecture for the same in further sections. And by default, the automatically generated main method would be async method. So that is the reason inside of your top-level statements, you can try using the await keyword. Okay, we have not covered the async and await keywords as of now. Maybe if possible in future, I will add a lecture for the same, how to use the async and await keywords. Generally, these async and await keywords are used to access the databases or files. That means file or database operations asynchronously in background. Okay, we will look at them later. So this is the summary of the top-level statements. And you can download these notes from the resources button of this lecture.